Hey, you guys, welcome to the Coachable Podcast. I am your host, Tori Gordon, and today we're in studio with one of my absolute dearest friends. Avery Valentine is back for her second appearance on this show. So excited to have you back. If you don't know Avery, if you haven't listened or watched our first initial episode, I highly recommend you go back to do that. We'll link it in the show notes for you. But Avery is an incredible embodiment coach and facilitator, and her work really focuses on authentic expression through expressive arts, therapy, and all different types of modalities that she weaves into her unique method to help her clients achieve authentic connection to themselves and express that in the world in a deep and meaningful way. And my relationship to myself has been deepened as a byproduct of being your friend and being in your presence. And so many codes get dropped into my awareness just like from being around you. And so I wanted to have you back on the show because when you and I get together, we could just literally talk for hours and hours and hours. And we do because there's so much to say and also so much that I learn from being with you. So first, I'm just excited to have you back and welcome to the show again.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I feel like we have the best conversations.
Yeah, it's so nourishing, and you're just one of those friends where I always leave inspired. I leave excited about life. I leave more curious and open. And this conversation, what I want to talk about today for those at home that are listening and tuning in is this important conversation around consent. What is consent and how we can build a deeper trust in ourselves and build trust within the relationships that we find ourselves in, and how we can learn to honor and respect the boundaries of other people, and also how to set those for ourselves. And so that's the context I want to, kind of set, and the frame I want to set around this conversation is, especially in 2024, the word consent gets thrown around a lot. So let's just start out by defining what that is. What does consent mean to you as an embodiment coach, as a woman, as a human being? And how do you think, consent impacts our lives?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big question. Personally, consent for me, it's an energy that plays out in every connection, every dynamic, even within myself, for myself, to myself. And so consent is remaining in my center and in truth. And then when in relation to another, also meeting them in their truth and getting consent. So it's like the yes, that fuck yes, rather than is it a maybe or a no? And so that's why the truth and the presence and integrity of your own truth is so important with consent.
Yeah.
If you don't know yourself, how are you going to be in consent with anybody?
Yeah.
And so really for me, it's this overarching energy of how we show up, how we move through the world, how we relate to ourselves and others. And when we fall out of consent, when we fall out of that truth or alignment with ourselves and others, remembering that we can clear that energy and come back to that at any moment in time.
Yeah, it sounds like truth is really at the core of what consent is. And it's so, what we talk about so often on the show, what we talked about last week on the show around authentic relating and creating conscious relationships and friendships where we can show up in our truth and be our authentic, most genuine, real, vulnerable selves. And this quality of consent that allows us to respect someone's autonomy and sovereignty as a human being, their choices, their body, their boundaries. And before we can really respect all of those things in someone else, I'm not going to say necessarily before we can respect other people's boundaries, we have to know those things for ourselves, but they go hand in hand.
Yes.
So talk to me about your relationship with consent and coming into this awareness and your background and history with kind of this work.
I want to touch on the one piece you mentioned there with knowing ourselves first. And, I think the nuance to that is understanding that we can only meet others and their boundaries and their consent and their truth to the level and depth that we have with ourselves. And so it's like, yes, we can honor other people's boundaries, their autonomy, their sovereignty, their agency. And we will only be able to do that to the extent that we do it for ourselves. And so that's just that clarity. So it's, there's so many ways to do it. And the deeper that we do it for ourselves, the deeper that we can meet other people in those places. And so that's just the piece I wanted to add to that. Because it's beautiful. It's that spiral, as we spiral deeper. And then for myself, okay, so my journey with consent. I really grew up being a chameleon and a people pleaser. And I grew up in a family that really prioritized the patriarchy in men. And so as a girl, as a woman, I was always taught that I didn't really have autonomy. I didn't really have a voice, and I didn't really matter unless I was in service to a man or somebody outside myself. And, so consent was not something I understood. Yeah. And it was definitely a very Italian family, and it was very touchy. I was actually sexually abused through my childhood by a family member. And so that carried on into my adulthood, where I would end up in situations, in relationships where consent was not existent. I would say no, and it would not be honored. And I just thought that was normal. I'm like, oh, okay. And it wasn't until I had a very dear friend on this journey of personal development that he was the one that was like, no, that's rape. Like, just because you gave up fighting doesn't mean it's okay. Right. And that was huge for me, and starting to understand that I do have autonomy. I do, and it matters. My voice matters. And the things that happen to me are important. And so it's up to me to be clear on these things for myself. And then also helping other women, especially, understand like our voice and our agency. And it's beautiful because consent can be so subtle. I think boundaries and consent, people get the ick because they're like, oh, it's this big harsh wall or like whatever. It needs to be a conversation. And what I've really learned is it can be such a subtle energy of how you show up, how you carry yourself, the conversations you choose to indulge in and have with other people. Everything, these subtle energies teach people what is okay and what is not okay. And so it doesn't always have to be this big no or big hullabaloo of like, this is not happening. And sometimes people will test us and we'll get pushed there. And it can also just be those subtleties in learning discernment, and comes with truth and integrity of knowing yourself, of, who are the people I'm going to let close to me? Who are the people I can trust to honor my boundaries and consent? Who are the people who are not going to put me in a position where I'm going to have to puff up my chest and be like, that's not okay. And you keep those people close. And then the other ones, keep a little further. Yeah.
So much to unpack with what you just said. First of all, thank you for sharing your story and your past experience and your history with sexual abuse and assault, because so many men and women, it's not just, women who have experienced, being bulldozed by people who don't understand consent and are selfish ultimately. That's what I mean. There is an essence of selfishness that comes with not respecting someone else's sovereignty. And I think it's important to define that for people. We use these lofty words like sovereignty and agency and autonomy, but if I had heard those words early in my personal development journey, they might have gone over my head a little bit, because we're all on a spectrum of consciousness where we're understanding more about ourselves. And so to even define that, because what those things are, agency, sovereignty, and autonomy, and how those are very similar, but also they have their own, uniqueness to them. But like, if we don't understand that principle, then we don't understand that, like you said, that my voice matters, how I feel matters, that actually there is a world in which I can live where I'm honored and what's true for me gets honored, versus having to live my life in service to what other people want and their desires trump my truth. So can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this, because as you were sharing, it's like, oh, So with the sovereignty piece, a big part of that journey for me in reclaiming my voice and my power was also, it's what, when you said like the selfish piece, oftentimes I was able to look back and realize like most of the time people are just unconscious.
Right.
So unconscious. And so for me, sovereignty, when I reflect on these experiences, is I don't go, oh my gosh, I'm a victim. How dare this happen to me? Whoa. It's like, no, I had a pattern. I had an understanding. I had, this is what's normal. It's okay. And so I allowed people in my life who were unconscious to these energies, to these dynamics, to play these out with me. And I thought it was okay. I was a willing, in a sense, participant, even unconscious to the experience. And so in reflection, there's just a lot of forgiveness for not only myself, but for these people. And also that compassion of, I know what it's like to live unconsciously. And I know how out of control and terrifying and just unfulfilling it really is. And so then there's also the compassion of like, wow, I really hope these people are able to find their way. Because especially when people are not honoring other people's boundaries, oftentimes, especially when it comes to like romance, love, sexuality, it's really their inner child grasping for intimacy and love. And it's just low-hanging fruit. It's like, this is how I'm going to get it the quickest. Let me grab this. And so for me, true sovereignty is realizing that I am the creator, whether conscious or unconscious, of every experience in my life. And so, you know, that doesn't negate the pain, that doesn't negate the challenges I go through. And understanding for me, sovereignty is that everything in my life is ultimately leading me to be my highest and best self. It's ultimately leading me and giving me the gifts, the understanding, so that I can be of service to the world in some capacity. And so for me, sovereignty is really owning that. It's like, there is nothing outside of me, even if it's, you know, people be like, oh, well, what about a car crash? And, you know, you get hit by a car. Okay. I look at that as there's something for me here. What was I thinking about when that happened? How was my energy? What was I focused on? Was there something worse ahead? Was it really time for me? Like right now, I really need to get a new car. Someone take out my car because the universe is like, girl, your car's not turning on half the time. Get a new car. You know, so it's like, it's all the perspective we choose. And when you come from a sovereign place, you're choosing the perspective of, I have the power to consciously create my reality, and I will find the growth, the truth, the deeper understanding, almost from like a godlike perspective that's bigger than me as to what is happening and how I can come back into my center, back into my truth. Is that for me sovereignty?
Yeah. I mean, this whole piece around what you said, when of unconscious to conscious living, this process of awakening that we go on when we start to become aware, the art of awareness that we begin to tap into when for the first time we realize, oh, maybe I am the common denominator in every experience in my life, in every relationship in my life, in every career or opportunity I've had in my life. People have come and gone, things have happened, but I have been there for all of them, right? And so when you start to understand that, then it unlocks the door to your all the unconscious things. And that is a lifelong journey of walking into these rooms of our psyche and our lives where we are still living unconsciously, where we can bring more awareness and intentionality to the way we show up and be responsible for that and how, you know, the energy and the intention that we bring to any situation. So I think that's really important to add here. And when we are conscious, now we are responsible.
Yes.
And so when we're entering into dynamics with people who are not conscious, my teacher and one of my coaches always said, if you're in a dance and in a dynamic with somebody who's not aware and not conscious, you have more responsibility.
Yes.
And that is, we want to offload responsibility a lot of times. We want to blame other people and we want to blame our circumstances, or you did this to me, you hurt me, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But where is my role in all of this too? So what does that, you know, what else do you think is important around that taking responsibility for your sovereignty so that you can even come into dynamics of truth within yourself and with the relationships that you're in and the dynamics that are at play within your life?
Yeah. Can you refine the question for me?
Yeah, I think where I want to take this is like, what's the role of personal responsibility when it comes to how we show up in our relationships?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And it's something I teach when I do conscious touch pujas, which is all about learning to use the basis, Dr. Buddy Martin's wheel of consent, and then intertwined with my teacher's wheel of energetic exchange. And it's a question that comes up because in a conscious touch puja, people are interacting and touching each other. And so they're like, well, who says something first? And this is the responsible part. It's whoever becomes aware something is off first. They have the responsibility. And so that's what with the personal responsibility piece, it's like, if you have the awareness, so often we are afraid of the vulnerability or being wrong or as seen as crazy. And so we withhold that information, but then we make a mess of everything. And then we're also out of consent because now our energy's off. Something's wrong in this dynamic and we have not voiced it. And so it's muddling up, it's messing up the whole dynamic. And the other person might not be where you're at on your journey and they might feel it, but be unconscious. And then they're just gonna be like, something's wrong here, but I don't know what. And so a lot of people are avoidant in our society. And so they'll just avoid the situation, maybe even avoid you. They're like, let's just distance myself and get safe
Something's
from this.
off and I don't know how to address it.
And maybe I don't even know what it is. And so it's the personal responsibility is, the moment you notice something is off, say something.
When you feel something, say something.
Say it, and be okay making a mess of it. You know this because you're my friend. I've been on a dating journey. And the biggest piece I've had to learn was like, being okay making a mess of it. If I notice something's off, saying something, even if it feels weird or vulnerable, or maybe a lot of times the other person's just like, whoa, I never even thought of that. Like, how'd you think of these things? And so understanding sometimes people don't even understand the experience you're having, but that's personal responsibility. It's like, I'm going to say something, even if this person thinks I'm crazy, even if it makes this person not want to be around me, because I'm responsible for my experience and how I feel. And I'm aware that something feels off here. Yeah. And so, I think part of the personal responsibility is clarity. So we look at, if we look at the wheel of energetic exchange here, it's, the center of consent is always presence, intention, and integrity. Okay. So that is the core of remaining in consent. The moment you lose presence, you can fall out of consent. The moment you are not clear on your intention, fall out of consent. The moment that you lose integrity, you fall out of consent. So the core guiding principles to remain in consent and that personal responsibility piece is presence, integrity, and intention. Yeah. And when you move from that place, it's so much easier to remain in consent and be responsible for yourself.
This is, okay, I'm so glad we're going here and that you outlined those three things. Yeah. I hope you guys are taking notes because this is really important. And one of the things that it immediately brings up is, where are we? First, you can immediately just start to look at the dynamics in your life. Where am I not present to the interactions that I'm having? Where do I not have intention? Yeah. But why am I here? Why am I engaging in this? Right? How many dating experiences have you had, or any kind of dynamic where it's the unconscious where I'm not even aware of, why am I doing this? Why am I here? And if that hasn't been expressed and shared, and we're in agreement for why we're participating in this, then how many relationships have started out of consent before they even get started, right? Can you speak? Can you speak to that? Like, how do we create safe spaces, create relationships that are built on consent and openness, and, whether that's in a business environment or a personal environment, versus from the get-go, when we're not sharing our intention through integrity with presence, we're setting ourselves up for failure immediately.
Yeah, and just making a mess of it.
Yeah.
And then in the end, it's when people get resentful or like, oh, they're the bad guy, or like, you're the bad guy, or whatever.
Or like, I have an expectation that you're going to be this thing for me, but I have not voiced that to you at all.
Yeah, which are all shadows. It's, and so if we look at, which we'll do like where we can give this to people and they can see it. So if we look at the wheel of energetic exchange, when we're in shadow, when we're outside of the wheel, that is when we get in all these messy dynamics.
Okay.
And so each quadrant has shadows. So for example, let's take the expectation piece. Oftentimes, if somebody has an unspoken expectation, it would be in the taking quadrant then. They want something. So the other person is now put into allowing unconsensually. And so what happens if you're in the shadow of that, that's where someone can be seen as creepy, narcissistic, entitled, all of these, manipulative, greedy. And then it puts the other person where they feel the victim, used, taken advantage of, exploited, they're tolerating, codependent, you feel like the doormat. And so if you wanted to get back in right relation, it's the clarity, that clarity of, so for example, if you're going on a date, having clarity of what is my intention with this person? So many people go on dates and they have no idea. I can't tell you how many dates I've been on when I ask, like, what are you looking for? I don't know. I'm just exploring. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So, having that clarity of like, what am I showing up for? And what do I want? Are there any expectations? Do I feel like I need something from this person? And, personal responsibility would be, and sovereignty would be clearing that first.
Asking.
And then asking if there's something that you can't clear.
Yeah.
So when I say clearing, it's like noticing a lot of us have unhealthy patterns of expectation or needing or wanting outside of ourselves. And so the sovereignty piece would be, okay, are these healthy, like standards, for example, like totally healthy and valid to have standards? And is there those shadowy expectation? And so those shadows, are they things that are rules or programs that I've created to keep me safe, my ego? Or are these standards? There's a distinction between that. And then, asking, being like, hey, and this is a big thing when we do pujas, when we touch people, it's, having that conversation. Here's my desire. Here's the fear. And here's my boundary. And then you get to have a negotiation. And that's the biggest piece. It's a negotiation. The person can say no. And so, if you have an expectation being like, hey, for example, let's say I helped you move. And I'm like, hey, Tori, I'm going to come help you move. And I'm noticing that my expectation is that if I move, that you would also be there for me in that way. And then you get to tell me prior to me helping you, if you're okay with that. And if you say no, then my personal responsibility is, okay, do I still want to help her move? And that doesn't make either of us a bad guy. It's just keeping us in consent. Because otherwise, if I show up with that expectation, now I'm in taking, I'm pretending to be in service though. So there's 4 quadrants: there's service, serving, and then receiving, taking, and allowing. So I'm showing up, I'm going to help you. I'm serving you as my friend. But then reality, my subconscious, I'm like, well, Tori fucking owes me now. Like, okay, well, that's fucked up, And so if we have the conversation and you say no, that's called informed consent. If I now show up and help you, I have now agreed to this informed consent that you're not going to help me later on. And I'm okay with that. I can't come back around later when I'm moving and be like, Tori, are you going to help me? And she's like, no, I told you I'm not going to do that. I'm busy. And be like, oh,
you're not a good friend.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Like, no, we had this conversation. You're being delusional now. And that's remaining in consent. It's having that clarity up front of like, oh, I need, and it's okay to need things. It's okay to have expectations, but yet not
as long as they're shared and voiced.
Yeah, exactly. Because then we put people in these roles that they never consented to, they never agreed to, and then it creates disharmony, dis-ease in these relationships. There's breakdown that needs to be cleared up, and that's when people get into the shadows. So each quadrant has a shadow that looks a little different depending on the role you're playing in that relationship.
Okay, can we break this down? Because we're going to have it on the screen for people to be able to to look at. And we might even have a link in the show notes that you can go to and download a version of this for yourself. So if you want to follow along, I think this is such a helpful graphic to help us understand these things, because even as you are talking about, okay, well, if you've ever felt like a victim, or you felt taken advantage of or used by someone, you felt exploited, okay, you can almost use this as a reference to understand, where have I fallen out of consent with people? So you can almost reverse engineer this to understand more about yourself and the dynamics that you're in.
100%. Yeah. So I love that, the reverse engineering, that's a big one. So it's like, if you feel like the victim, okay, is there an unspoken expectation I'm feeling placed upon me? And if so, can I ask this person with curiosity, hey, I'm noticing I'm feeling a little pressure in this relationship. Do you have some expectations of me that I'm not meeting? Is there something like that we can communicate? And then you can clear that conversation.
And if not, then you can release your pressure that you've maybe put on yourself.
Exactly. And sometimes the other person might not even be aware that they've put expectations on you. And so by you, it's the responsibility piece. It's like, by you bringing it up, it gives them a moment to reflect. Am I doing this? And then, if they say no, trust people. Trust what they're saying. Even if they're not in truth, trust that if they're not in truth, you can stand your ground. Meaning that if they're putting these expectations on you, they say no, you stay in your center then, and you don't bend to their unspoken expectations. If there's a problem later on, it's like, you told me you didn't have any expectations. This sure sounds like an expectation, so trusting your own center in that. So if we were to break down, though, this wheel of energetic exchange, which is based in Dr. Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent, there's 4 quadrants. Okay. And each of the 2 quadrants, there's 2 that always are engaging with each other. Okay. So the one that most of us are living in and used to most often would be accepting and serving, which is receiving. So the key here, though, is if you want to stay in consent, you're going to serve from a place of generosity. So when you're feeling abundant and overflowing, not from what a lot of us do, which is
obligation.
Yes, I have to do this. I'm so tired. I don't want to, but I'm going to. No, now you put all of us out of consent.
Okay, so just stop there. Yeah. Everyone at home. How much are you giving to your family, to your friends, to your coworkers, serving in your business, your partner, from a place of obligation and have to or should, versus I'm doing this because I want to, because I feel generous, because this is the way I want to show up and give of my time, of my energy, of my love, of whatever. If you're a parent, if you're a partner, if you're a friend, anybody, we do this with absolutely everyone in our lives, and with yourself. Oh, I've got to go to the gym, or I've got to do this thing because I have to do it, or because I'm feeling like I want to give myself this experience for whatever reason. So I want you guys, as we go through this, to take time, maybe even stop this episode and journal and really go into where are the dynamics at play in my life where I'm out of consent just in this quadrant alone. I think this could be a really transformational episode and exercise for everybody, where you start to understand where you're giving, or you've fallen into the shadow aspects of these pillars of this wheel of consent.
And for the people who identify as, well, I'm just a giver, be aware that the person who's accepting this giving, if you're doing it from a place of obligation, they can feel that energy.
Yes.
And it does not feel good.
It doesn't feel good to receive.
No. You're just ugh. And so everyone's out of consent. Whenever we're out of consent is when our animal body, the lizard brain, we start to feel it. We're like, something's not right here. I'm not safe here.
Twitch.
Yeah,
I get a little twitch.
I gotta get away.
Yeah.
And so, okay, you can identify as a giver, but maybe you need to give to yourself first, fill up your cup, and then you can give from that place of generosity.
And what I appreciate about you as a friend is if I ask something from you, or if you know you're in a depleted place, you'll be like, I need to give to myself first, before I can show up, so that you're not out of consent with the way that you give. And that's why I trust you as a friend. Well, that's why our dynamic feels really safe, because where that lacks in other friendships, it's like, I don't know, is this like,
yeah,
you don't ever want people to show up because they feel that pressure
obligation.
or
it doesn't feel good to be receiving on that end.
Yeah.
And, I can already hear the parents being like, well, I have to do stuff.
Yeah.
So or like people in marriages, well, I have to do this for my husband or my wife or my partner. The nuance in that. The piece that I had to learn, and I thankfully had a beautiful friend who I love dearly who would do this to me. And I had to realize like, oh, they're just putting the responsibility in my court is, and I've started practicing this, and is what you speak of, is there's people that I love dearly. And there's times that they want my support and they'll ask for it. And yeah, I'm not in a place, but sometimes it sounds like it's something they really need. So what I'll offer is I'll say, I don't want to. I'll be honest. I don't feel like it. And if this is important to you, if you really need me, I will be there for you. Mm-hmm. Because now it's letting them know that it's not something, I'm not generously offering this. I'm being truthful. And so if this is really important and they really need me, it's putting the responsibility in their hands that I will be there for them because I love them. Mm-hmm. And understanding that the energy might not feel like it would feel if I was showing up
from a full cup.
Yeah. Because now it's like, okay, yeah, I'm here for you. And I'm not abandoning you. Like, I love you and I'm in it with you. And if you really need me, you're going to take the responsibility of asking from that truth then.
And I'm going to be honest about where I am at.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie about it.
And that's all that's the most loving thing you can do.
100%. And that keeps me then in my intention, my presence, and my integrity. Mm-hmm. My intention there is I love this person and I'm here for them if they need me. My presence is like, I don't want to do this. Mm-hmm. And the integrity is I'm going to be honest that I don't want to do this. Mm-hmm. And that I will if you need me to. And so we'll move.
Because you don't always, life isn't always about doing what you want to do all the time.
Yeah.
And exactly. I think that's an important piece here.
Yeah.
Because some people can hear this and be like, oh, I can just do whatever I want when I want to do it. And it's all about me and and almost be like, okay, what a selfish way to live and be in the world. But it's like, we're talking about authenticity and we're talking about integrity.
Yeah. And you're not always going to be feeling generous.
Yeah, you're not.
And the people you love sometimes still need you to show up for them.
Yes.
And so, it's that balance. It's how can I honor my truth while allowing this person to know that I'm here if they need me. I'm not abandoning them. I'm not leaving them. So,
So that's serving.
That's serving. Yeah. And if we move to accepting, so when you see this graph, you'll see that the arrows are moving towards accepting. What that means is that the person who is accepting is the person who is passive and receiving. So the serving person is active and they are giving to the other person.
So in regards to energetics, this is where the energy is flowing towards the person that's accepting or receiving out of the person that's serving. Yes. So you can see the energy move through that line.
And so accepting would be accepting from a place of gratitude. That's the key with accepting. Because if you accept from a place of, oh, well, they owe me, we're out of consent. Now you're entitled. And so it's remembering that gratitude. And I think one of my teachers, he always said, in our culture, we're taught to fall in love. And what I love it with his reframe is he said, what if we all chose to rise in love? That every single interaction or moment or experience with another person is a gift that they never had to give you. And not looking at it from if they leave this place, oh, wow, how dare they leave me? Like, what have I lost? But what a gift that I spent that moment or this time with that person and I got to experience them. And if I never experience them again, what a gift. This love that they shared with me. And so I love that reframe. And so even when you're accepting, it's like this person never had to serve you. They never had to be present in your life. So what a gift that they chose to do this for you.
Yeah.
And now we'll move to the edgy ones.
Okay.
These are the ones that everyone gets a little uncomfortable with. This is taking and allowing. And these are, culturally, there's already so much stigma around taking. Like even the word, people are like, taking. I don't want to be a taker. And this dynamic can be so healing and so beautiful when done in consent with safety. And so the arrows on this, the energy is actually going both ways.
Okay.
Because it is a gift to both people when done in consent. So we'll look at taking first. Taking is the active, and they're technically the one receiving in this. because they're taking for their pleasure, for what their desire is. And the key with this is taking from a place of clarity. You must be clear on what you're taking. So for example, if you and I were having a dynamic, let's say we're in a puja and I'm like, Tori, I really would love to take for my pleasure. Now I would share with you what I want to take. And so if I'm like, okay, I really want to play with your hair. I maybe want to like spoon you and just cuddle you. And then let's say we get into the dynamic and I wasn't clear and you're going to feel that. You're going to be like, ooh, she feels unsure of what she's taking. And maybe I start like touching parts of you that I didn't communicate. You're going to go into a response of like, I don't feel
retract.
Yeah, I'm not safe now. What's happening? And so that's the key with taking is that clarity, which also the presence, the intention, that integrity is so important when you're taking. And then when you're allowing, it's allowing from a place of trust and surrender, fully trusting and fully surrendering. And what I often find is so many times in pujas when people are practicing these experiences, when they go into taking, they start serving. And once again, you're out of consent. I'm going to tell you, the person who's in allowing feels it. And they're like, this doesn't feel right. Like it feels like it's not for them. It feels like it's to please me. Something's off. And so one of the reframes I've been sharing with people in this is all the time, all of us are having to think for ourselves, figure it out, and just be so on. So when we actually gift somebody taking from clarity and they can go into allowing, gift.
Yeah.
They get to surrender. Like you just melt. Like,
you don't
wow,
have to think.
I don't have to think. I just get to be held and like experience what's been agreed upon here. And that is a gift. And so reframing for those people that are like, well, I want to serve. It's like, you are in a way serving. That's why the energy goes both ways. Because when that person gets to fully experience that trust and surrender, what a gift.
Yeah.
How often in life do we fully get to trust and surrender another human?
Well, I'm wondering maybe for those who really struggle with trusting and surrendering, it might be because so many of their dynamics are out of consent where they're not safe.
Yep.
So if you are someone who's listening at home and you're like, trust is really hard for me, letting go, relaxing and surrendering into the moment is really challenging. Maybe I'm really hypervigilant and I like control and I'm always on guard and I feel I have to protect myself. Well, maybe there have been a lot of dynamics in your world where people are taking without you consenting to it, where you feel like you have to protect yourself. And it almost will go against everything you've been programmed, your nervous system, your programming, your conditioning, to let that guard down. But why we're talking about this is so important is that like, yes, Avery creates pujas where you can experience these things, but the intention is to take this out into your life and to practice it in your life and with your friends and with your relationships and your partner and your children and whoever else in your life so that we can be and authentically relate. You know, I love that this conversation is coming right on the heels of last week's episode about authentic relating, because we can only authentically relate to the degree that we're in consent and integrity, presence, and intention.
100%. Yeah. You know, and that's a big piece too, is oftentimes those people who are involuntary in allowing, if we're going to go back to personal responsibility, where are you not using your voice when someone crosses your boundaries? Where are you being the doormat? Where are you just like, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to feel rejected. What if they don't like my boundary? What if they don't listen? Okay, well, you'll never.
What if they leave?
You'll never know if you don't say anything. And now you're willingly, unconsciously participating in this experience that's also impacting your nervous system.
Because we also oftentimes want to blame the taker.
Yeah.
We want it, and in relational dynamics, they get the bad rep.
Oh, yeah.
And the victim is the one that we kind of
coddle
and save.
Yeah.
But it is a two-way street. And I think this is such a good depiction of the energy going both ways, because it's the responsibility falls on both people.
Sides. Because also, let's say I have a lover and I've never told them that I don't like something. And now let's say we're in the dance of lovemaking and they do something I really don't like. And I don't say shit. And now I'm just harboring this going on. We go to make love again. There's a part of me now that's a little on edge. And I continue this compounding of not liking what's happening because I'm holding something that I never communicated. All it's going to do is create this separation. And now I'm making them the bad guy. But what, they're supposed to be a mind reader?
Right.
They're psychic. They know I didn't like this thing. Like how, naive in a sense, and also just selfish on my part then. Like now I made them the villain when they didn't even there was no malicious intent.
I'll tell you, there are a lot of people in therapy talking about these things right now without this awareness.
Yeah.
That they also play a role. And obviously you understand this as somebody who's experienced abuse and sexual assault.
Yeah.
Like there are real victims of real things, and we are not here to say that there are not.
Yeah.
However, as we grow in awareness in our consciousness, we get to look at the ways that we play into these dynamics in our lives, and so that we don't recreate the same situations, so that we don't find ourselves in situations. And there's no guarantee. I mean, things can happen that are absolutely beyond your control.
For sure.
But how can we control what is within our control?
Yeah. And how we choose to react or perceive. What lens am I choosing? One of the pieces that I love is this piece on intention. We can't assume somebody else's intention, but oftentimes we do.
Oh, so much.
So I love the hottest thing a guy ever said to me recently on a date. I was geeking out about this kind of stuff, like as I do. And at one moment I caught myself that I was rambling, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I just went on a tangent. And he's like, no, I am endlessly curious. And I was like, that is so hot. And so that's the key though. If we can take that into our dynamics with others, being endlessly curious rather than assuming. So let's say something happened I didn't like. What if I just say, hey, I'm curious. How was this experience for you? What was your intention? What were you desiring or hoping from this outcome? Rather than going in with my agenda of you did this wrong. I didn't like this. Let me first hear, like, what was their experience? And then once I hear them, I hold that space of like, maybe they were just fumbling through it. They didn't know what they were doing. They weren't clear on what they wanted. Then now I can come in and be like, okay, well, this was how it really impacted me. And these are where I have to draw some boundaries. I didn't like this. Let's not do that again. And now we can come back into right relation.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're just going to assume. They meant to do that. They meant to harm me. Most of the time, nobody's paying attention to us, okay? We're the background characters in everyone else's story. Yes, we're the main character on our own, but most of the time, even when you're in a relationship, romantic or friendship, whatever, you're a side character. You're not the main character. And so it's so easy. We're in these busy worlds with our busy minds and our busy lives. It's so easy to forget about somebody else's experience.
Yeah.
And so that curiosity of just like, hey, how was this for you? What was your intention? What did you want?
Yeah, there's so many things that come up for me. One is the Brene Brown quote, which is so simple and so true, where she's like, clear is kind. So to be clear with our intention, to be clear to ask to have a clearing conversation, I just did in Revive Women, my monthly membership for women. We just went through a 4-part series, a month series on the 4 agreements. Which is to be impeccable with your word, to not take things personally. So how often we personalize things and why people do things, not make assumptions, and then to do your best, always do your best. And I think those are so applicable to this work where it's like, where am I not being impeccable with my word? Where am I not using my voice being impeccable with my word is saying yes to what a yes is, saying no to what a no is, not saying yes when I want to say no, right? Not taking something personally and personalize every action and behavior of somebody else and make it everything about you, and realize that you are the background character in other people's lives. Not making assumptions requires, we make assumptions when we don't have the courage to ask for clarity.
Yes.
And the more I've been sitting with that, the more I see the opportunities where I get to have the courage to ask. And then there's do your best. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not always going to be impeccable with my word. I'm not going to always be able to not take everything personally. But the more aware I become and the more conscious I am, and the more that I continue to do this work on myself, my best gets better.
Yeah.
And that's really, those were things on top of this, I think, are really helpful guiding principles in this work. Because if you're listening to this at home and you're like, man, authentic relating, consciousness, being a conscious person on a spiritual path, personal development, this is like a lot of work. It is. Like laziness, apathy. They're not, this requires you to be present and to show up for your life in these moments. Do we always get it right? No. We do not. But like as we awaken and as we become more conscious, there's a responsibility to how we show up. And that means there's effort that has to be applied to these places.
And it's work. And at the same time, I believe it is truly the only path to feel fully alive in your life, to find fulfillment, to find that passion, to
be met.
Yeah.
In the love and the types of connections you want.
Yeah. Because it's like, if you never meet yourself, which when you're meeting yourself, it's like, who am I beyond the conditioning, society, my parents, culture, whatever? How can you ever be met? You'll always be a shell or a caricature of who you think you need to be or who you've been taught to be. So it's, having that, whatever that looks like for you, that daily contemplation, that sitting with self of who am I and how am I moving in the world? How can I sit with myself deeper? And that's that piece of being met. It's like, you can't be met if you can't meet yourself. And even still, I posted something recent, it was hilarious. It was like, you're going to date your shadow until you integrate it. And one of our friends, she's like, wow, coming from my throat out here. And I was like, girl, I'm coming from my own throat.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's so true. If we're not integrating our shadow, and by integrating, it's seeing those parts of our unconsciousness, learning them, and then repatterning, showing up differently as choosing consciously to behave different in those experiences. We will be met by it. And then we'll call them the bad guy. Yeah. We'll be like, wow, that guy was terrible.
Which is why we get to excuse our behavior.
Yeah.
And we get to continue to not change, essentially. Yeah. Because sometimes change is uncomfortable and it's hard and it takes work and it's effort. But it is the path, and like last week's episode, and I've said this before on this show so many times, it's like truth is the North Star. If we can keep truth as in my relationships is the thing that we put above everything else, then even if this clearing conversation, even if me asking for, or sharing this expectation or whatever it is, if that means the end of the relationship in truth, then that's the best thing to happen for everyone. And that's okay. You know what I mean? And every relationship will not last forever. People come into our lives to teach us certain things for certain seasons. And the goal is to just have is to do things in truth and to not be in the shadow aspect. So this takes us perfectly to the outside of this wheel of consent into the shadow, because we've talked about serving and accepting. We've talked about taking and allowing. Well, before we moved into the shadow, can you give a real life example outside of a puja, like where someone might be taking and allowing dynamic in life, where people can identify that for themselves, what that looks like and feels like, maybe that they've seen themselves in before? Yeah,
I'll give two examples because one will probably relate more to the masculine and one will relate more with the feminine. Okay, cool. So I'll give the masculine first. So a great one for the masculine, oftentimes this happens where maybe a guy has been doing a lot for a romantic partner or a lover, and then next thing they know, it's almost like this person just is constantly expecting these things and it doesn't feel good anymore. You're like, well, it was nice when I was choosing to give this to you, but now it's an expectation and it's like, I'm now in this place being the doormat or being codependent where I just keep giving it because I'm afraid of your wrath if I don't, or I'm afraid that you'll tell me I'm wrong or leave me or not love me, I'll lose the love. And so then they end up in this dynamic where they're allowing, but it's unconsensual. And the other person's just taking. And this can happen in business too. We can agree on things and then the person's like, well, I don't want to lose this opportunity. So they just keep giving more and more and more. And the next thing you know, you're like, whoa, I feel like a doormat. I'm giving so much and it's not being reciprocated. They're just taking everything from me.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Really good one.
And
so then, notice if you've been in that dynamic before.
And then for the feminine, this is one that almost every woman I've ever met has experienced. A great one is, and this is a great shadow experience of like how we can people aren't clear on what they're wanting, and then they put us into out of consent, is how many women have had a man be like, oh, I would love to give you a massage. They make it seem like they're going to be in service. Let me just give you a massage. Yeah, your back hurts, your neck hurts. Gladly give you a massage. Next thing you know, they're massaging you and you're like, this is
leading somewhere.
Yeah, this feels like it's more for you than it is for me right now. And so now they've just put us into allowing and they're taking, but this was not the agreed upon dynamic. You said you were going to serve me and now you're taking from me. And so that's one that so many women I've met have experienced that. And that's a great way to see that as well in shadow.
Yeah. Okay. So on the outside of this wheel of consent is the shadow of these different, would you call these like not archetypes, but energetic exchanges.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So let's go through the shadows so that people can continue to identify these for themselves.
Yeah.
Where should you want to start in serving?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in serving, oftentimes when you're in shadow, you might feel like the martyr. You can feel exhausted, resentful, defeated, burdened, codependent. Oftentimes we see a lot of mothers, a lot of women end up in these roles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely have at times noticed that in my life. Also, when I was actually like, when I think back to when I have felt that, it's been when I was overly in my masculine.
Interesting.
Giving from a place, where I was just like burnt out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's the achiever in our society.
Yes. Yeah.
Where I have to be the best. And so to be the best, I need to give the most. That you see that in corporate world as well. People who are trying to climb the corporate ladder who are just giving to the machine.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, wait, why didn't I get the raise?
Oh my gosh.
My pay hasn't changed, but now my responsibilities have become so much more. And so once again, we create these because we're always teaching people who we are and what to expect of us. And when we do that and then you change, let's say you pull back, you're like, whoa, I realize I'm out of consent here. Now all of a sudden they feel like, wait, why did this person change? But all it was that you were out of consent and created this unhealthy dynamic with them.
Yeah, I'm thinking back in corporate where it's like your responsibilities just keep. Yeah, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's trying to prove your worth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Powerful.
Yeah.
So on the other side of that then is accepting.
Yeah. So oftentimes if you're in shadow, you'll feel entitled, helpless, kind of like the princess or prince archetype. You'll feel demanding, needy, spoiled, and lazy. Yes. So the prince or the princess archetypes are a really good one to look at for that. Just like everyone owes you, everyone needs to fix it. Like you can't do it yourself. Somebody's got to come save you and make it happen.
Yep. Okay. Definitely. That's important. Cool. And then we have got the taking and allowing dynamics. So you mentioned some of these already, but to revisit the shadow of taking.
Yeah. So taking, this is the one that we see as the predator, creepy, the villain, selfish, greedy, manipulative. Yeah. And if we move into allowing, then the shadow of allowing will be victim. They feel used, taken advantage of, feeling exploited, tolerating, codependent, or like a doormat. And I think tolerating is such a big one to point out there because even if you're like being the victim or the doormat, there's a part of you that's tolerating it if you're not voicing something.
Reminds me of the quote, it's like you get what you tolerate.
Yes.
And we teach people how to treat us based on what we tolerate and we allow. And this really gives such a powerful visual to that dynamic that I'd never seen before until I saw this, where, that level of toleration where you're like, what am I tolerating in my life that doesn't feel good? And how can when I start to look at that, I get to come back to my sovereignty and my agency. We're like, I'm choosing this to tolerate this on some level. And, as a coach, I do this work with my clients a lot where we look at the cost and the payoff to everything. There is a cost and a payoff to everything you choose to do in your life. And so if you're tolerating certain things, there's a cost to that where you're sacrificing your own value or your worth, or you're putting up with something that you don't deserve. But there is a payoff to that as well. Can you speak to that piece?
Yeah. So, I mean, we touched on it a little when we talk about the fear of voicing, because that's what we're losing is the payoff, essentially. And that's the fear of what we might lose. So oftentimes, sometimes we tolerate people's behavior because we feel safe or comfortable with them. So even for me, I use my reference of dating lately.
The payoff there is like, I don't have to use my voice. I can continue to be small. I can
be small, or even just like, someone else is driving the ship for me. Or I feel, for me with the dating, a big thing I realized when I kept showing up dating shadows was, oh my gosh, this feels easy and comfortable because it's the dysfunction I know. It doesn't actually require me to grow. It doesn't require me to be responsible. Yeah. I can just be a little princess. I can be a little baby and like get away with stuff that if somebody was really meeting me where I want to be met, they would not
put up with it.
No, they would be like, girl, what are you doing? Get up, do your things. Like, what is happening? Why are you no, we can't hang out with each other 24/7. We got shit to do. We're adults. But if you're hanging out with these shadow parts or these parts that are out of consent, there's, someone else is going to handle it, or there's the comfort oftentimes, the safety of like, it's the dysfunction I know. Yeah. It's what I'm used to. I'm not rocking the boat here.
Yeah. This is so, so powerful. And when you really start to digest this is a roadmap.
Oh, yeah.
This can be really a roadmap for creating the dynamics that will allow for the safety and the love and the connection that all of us really want. And so for those that are like eating this up, they're like, I need more. Because there are going to be the people where they're like, okay, this is all right. And then there are people that are like at home. They're like drawing the map and they're like following all the things. Do you have any other like books or resources or things that you would recommend for people to look into this further, or obviously your work and how they can work with you? And then, so I want to ask on that piece. And then like when you envision a world where these practices and principles are understood and they're respected in their practice, like what does that kind of world look like to you? Yeah. And where, so I'm going to leave. Those are two questions right there.
I'm going to start with your last one first. Okay. Because I really love that question. And for me, it's the world I desire to live in 100%. Yeah. And it's a world where there's true unconditional love and intimacy. Yeah. True intimacy. And like, it's a place where the true healing gets to happen. And people get to be respected for their individuality, your voice, your sovereignty. And to me, it's, it's that utopian dream. Yeah. It's like, that's where love lives. That's where, and that's, in the end, as you said, that's all we really want. The whole reason we conquer, the whole reason we go out and create and build and do all the things we do is to get love, to get intimacy. And it's intimacy. It's that deep connection, like, which comes from being fostered in places that are safe to have your truth. Yeah. And you have to be okay that other people will not have the same truth as you, and that's okay. Yeah. But when we can get to that place, that's the world I see. If we all can move from this, we're not all going to agree.
We're not. Yeah.
And that's okay. What a beautiful world where we can all have these differences and also then move within consent and come back to consent when we fall out, because we always will. Yeah. Even if all of us knew this and understood it, we would all still fall out of consent and make messes of it at times. Yeah. So just remembering that, like, we can always come back to our center. We can always come back. And to me, that world it's the world I dream of living in.
Same. Yeah. I mean, I think to just add one little piece to what you just said, I don't want people to assume that if you practice this, that means that relationships won't end. Yeah. Right. I actually had a clearing conversation with someone this past week where I needed to ask for clarity and because as a way of not making an assumption and coming up with a story about somebody. And through that discussion, what we realized is we really are going like, this relationship isn't going to end in deeper closeness, but it ended in deeper truth. Yeah. And that trumps everything, because that makes room for relationships where I can be met with closeness. And that feels really good.
Yeah, because we only have so much energetic capacity. Yeah. And so the people that we keep out of alignment, out of truth with, when we're out of consent, they're really just clogging up your space.
And you can feel that.
Yeah.
Or it's like taking all of your energy and you're thinking about it, and it's just like
looping.
It's like one of those tabs on your browser that is just draining the energy. If you've got like a million tabs on your browser, it's just like running all your energy. It's like one of those.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And the moment you clear it, as you probably experienced,
exit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And then I don't have to hold on to the story that this person's bad, that I'm bad because we're not close. It's just like, I just offloaded something that I don't need to carry.
And I'll touch on really quick, because I know we're coming to the end here, is also understanding that some people can't give you that clearing conversation. Sometimes.
Please speak to this piece,
because that's a big piece. Sometimes somebody might ghost you, or they might be avoidant. And so that's when we come back to personal responsibility of not assuming like, oh, it's bad about me, I did something, whatever the story is, yada, yada. But being in that place of compassion and understanding that this person has a nervous system, they have an attachment style that in order to remain safe in their narrative, in their life, they need to get away from you in whatever capacity that looks like. And they don't owe you anything, just like you don't owe them anything. And this is one of the deepest practices of surrender, of like, can I hold compassion and forgiveness for myself and this person, and close that within yourself of the understanding. How I look at it, how I heal and close these is, what did I receive? What did I learn? And if I don't want to be in relation to somebody who does this again, what can I pay attention to in the future so I can discern the character of somebody before getting this intimate or deep with them? And then closing that within myself of like, this person doesn't owe me anything. I can close this. I love them and I wish them the best on their journey. And this is where they're at. And so that's that piece of personal responsibility. And that, sometimes it means I'm throwing a fit. Like I throw fits. I will throw a whole tantrum about it. I'll be like, this isn't fair. I don't like this. Like, why?
Yeah.
But then I let it go because I moved it. Okay, yeah, you're right. It's not fair. And that's life. Yeah. And I can't control everybody.
And it gives you this opportunity to come back to your center where you are not codependent on someone else giving you the closure that you think you need, where you come back to your sovereignty and you're like, I can give this to myself.
Yeah.
It's in the midst of those endings, where so many questions come to the surface. And you're like, why did they do this to me? Do they not care about me? They don't love me? Did I not mean anything to them? Am I going to see them again? Am I ever going to find a love like this again? Blah, blah. All these questions come to the surface. And it reminds me of one of my teachers, Peter Cronin. He's like, the answer to all of those things are the same. I don't know.
Yeah.
That is the answer. And if you can learn to be okay with not knowing and to still be able to regulate yourself and to find a center within you, that it's like, I don't need to know everything to be okay.
Yeah.
That I can be okay despite not knowing, and I can find a peace within myself through the lessons that I choose to learn from it, through the story that I attach to it, the narrative that I tell about why this happened. And that is the gift that you get to give yourself, or the thing that you withhold from yourself that will continue to create pain and suffering in your life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. Thank you for adding to that.
Of course. Yeah. So circling back on what's next for people, in terms of how do they learn more?
Yeah. So, I highly recommend Dr. Betty Martin does have a book and a course study on Wheel of Consent. The one that they'll receive through our link is modified a bit, as it's been enhanced by a few of my teachers who now call it the Wheel of Energetic Exchange. With me, I have one-on-one coaching for embodiment. I look at it as liberation, accessing your primal animal. That's how I look at the tantric lens of integrating deeper aspects to be fully expressed and free in myself is through that, my animal body, as well as I'm going to start doing some group coursework around consent and, more of the foundational pieces. So that we can get more out there. I just recently had a conversation, thankfully, with amazing Nikki, who's here in the studio. And, I also am going to start teaching a bit about the tantric medicine wheel and how we can use that as a map to navigate life, ourselves, and just becoming more integrated and full into our soul's expression, whatever that means for you.
Yeah. I mean, this work is so transformational and deep. It's like, I want to bring you into the Revive Women's membership and get you to teach this because it is foundational and transformational, and the work needs to get out there. So if people want to learn more about your one-on-one coaching, as that's the opportunity that's available right now, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and find you?
Yeah, best way would probably be Instagram. Okay. Just send me a DM. I also have my intake form in my link tree on there, but if they have any questions, they can just send me a DM on Instagram.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll send all of that. That'll be available in the show notes, where you can connect with Avery on Instagram and go ahead and fill out her application and see how you can work with her. Because as you can see here, she's a wealth of knowledge, wisdom, medicine. You are a queen, and I'm just so grateful for you and have learned so much from you. Is there anything else you want to share with people before we end?
I'm just so grateful for you and to be here, and I love you, and you're also so inspiring to me, and I'm just deepest gratitude to get to be your friend and walk this journey with you.
Thank you, my love. All right, you guys, I know and trust that this served you and sparked questions and curiosities, and hopefully showed you a roadmap for how you can kind of hack your relationships and come into deeper connection and authenticity with yourself and the people that are in your lives. And that's our hope and our goal is for each other, for ourselves, and for this community, that we would all be able to experience the love that's available and that exists within each other, especially when we live and embody truth. So until next week, I hope you go practice and apply something you learned here. We'll see you next week on the Coachable Podcast.